Okay, so our next value vocabulary is going to be basically using this top area as a word bank to help us identify the different parts of forms. And for number 3. So when I look at this, our first vocabulary term is a light source. So where the light is coming from, it's a sun or a light bulb. Okay, so right down here in number 3, I'm actually going to have you guys add that. So here's where my little sun's going to be at. Okay, so I'm just going to draw a little circle up in the top left-hand corner. If you want to make them kind of fun and funky, you could add little sunbursts to them. Okay. Your choice, however you want to add your little light source. Okay. And now let's look at some of our vocab terms. So we've got a highlight. That's the lightest part of the form where the light is directly hitting the form. Okay, so right down here, I'm going to also read direction number 3 because I told you this is going to be our word bank. It says identify the different parts of value on the shaded forms. Write the answers on the provided blanks next to the forms. So A, if that's our highlight, okay, that's going to be our lightest part. So if I look at these forms, and that all looks like the lightest part, so A is going to be my highlight. E. When I look at the word midtones, that says the values that occur between the highlight and core shadow. Well, if I don't know what a core shadow is yet, let's figure that out. So core shadow, that's the darkest part of the form. It's the area of darkest shadow. So when I look at these forms, okay, it's kind of hard to tell with the cube, but the sphere and the cone and the cylinder, letter C seems like the darkest part. So we're going to make C our core shadow. Okay, well, it says that midtones are between the highlight and core shadow, so between A and C is letter B. Okay, so I'm going to assume that letter B is going to be my midtone. Okay, well now let's look at reflected light. So reflected light, that's light that bounces off another surface back onto the form. Okay, well what that means is if I look at letter D here, if I imagine here's the ground, right? If light's bouncing off the ground back onto my sphere, it's going to look a little lighter on the underside. Okay, so that letter D is going to be our reflected light area. If I imagine from my cube, I have an imaginary wall on this far side, and light's bouncing off of this wall back onto my form. Okay, I'm also going to get a little bit of a lighter area there. So D is your reflected light. And then last but not least, we have a cast shadow. So that's the shadow that is created by the form when light hits the form. So when light is hitting this form, okay, it creates this cast shadow, which is letter E. Okay, so that's your cast shadow. Okay, so let's look down here, number 4. So let's practice. Now we're going to use our light source, and we're going to use any of our value making techniques to shade the shapes into 3D forms. So these were our value making techniques right here that we talked about on page 1. And this first example, I'm going to try and copy what we have for an example up here. So we're going to try and use our blended technique. Okay? So I'm an artist that likes to work from the dark areas to the light areas. You can do vice versa, but I'm just going to show you how to go from the dark to the light. So we're going to start off by putting a little light source in. And I'm going to use my HB pencil. It's what I'm comfortable with. It's a middle tone value. Okay, some of you can use a 2B if you're more comfortable with that. But just like I see here, I'm going to work from my dark area, which is where letter C is, and I'm going to make a little strip in here. Okay, just to the right of the center line. Okay. Then if I look at my example here, okay, if I go to the right, it's basically just a value scale going from dark to light. Okay, and then if I look going to the left, it's also just a value scale going from dark to light. But when I look at the difference, the one on the right is just a darker value scale. It doesn't get as light. And the one on the left, it gets light really, really fast. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to start here in the middle, and I'm going to work towards the right. And I'm going to ease up on my pencil pressure so that it gets a little bit lighter as I go to the right. Okay. And when I work to the left, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to try and quickly get to a very, very light value. So barely touching the paper. I'm gonna stop right about here. So you guys don't have to draw this arrow, but that way you guys kind of know where I stopped. I'm trying to help it out here. Okay. So my core shadow area is pretty dark, but I want to make it even darker. So when I look at my pencils here, I might want to use my 6B because it's the darkest value and just overlap a little bit to make my core shadow area just a little bit darker. Okay. And then just the same thing, you don't want any gaps or jumps, so you kind of have to blend it out, making those value scales to the left and to the right. To finish off the front part here, if we notice in our printout, it's kind of hard to see, but we have a little bit of shading on that far left side. So I'm going to just take my lightest value, which is my 4H, just to add a little bit of shading. So I'm taking that 4H and I'm lightly going to add in a little bit of shading here, and I'm going to make it a value scale towards my highlight. I'm just lightly going to pull it in towards the center there and then leave a small gap of white unshaded area. So now our sphere no longer looks flat. It has that rounded nature to it. On the top of the form, I'm just going to turn it into a middle tone, and I'm going to pretend like my light source is actually down a little bit more. So in order to make that a middle tone, I'm going to take my HB pencil, and if you need to turn your paper to make it easier, I'm going to go through and just put one little flat value with my HB pencil to cover and fill in the top. And there's my cylinder. Our sphere, we're going to use rendering for our technique. So let's add our little light source. Just like our example up top here. I'm going to take my HB pencil. I'm going to fill in the whole thing with big ovals. One flat value. Little tip, if when you're shading this, you're using exactly straight lines like this, it's not going to look flat, or sorry, it's not going to look round. Okay, it's going to look flat. So you need to have those curvy lines in there. Okay, this next part you don't need to draw, but I just want to show you and bring your attention to it. So this core shadow on the sphere is actually like a crescent moon. So if I kind of outline it here, that's the area that we want to kind of fill in with our 6B pencil or our core shadow color. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to take my 6B, and just like I did before, I'm going to kind of add in that crescent shape. Okay? So it's not a straight line, it is curved and rounded, and it doesn't necessarily touch the bottom here because we have to have room for our reflected light. Here's also what we want to avoid. We don't want to have just this like giant, black strip, make it look like a planet, right? We got to do some blending to make it kind of even, okay? So even it out if you need to make it a little less of a strip. Okay. Well, we know rendering now is when we pull out some of the values. So I'm going to take my eraser, I'm going to pull out my highlight, anyway, pressing hard in a circle motion, and then slowly easing up on my eraser pressure so that it stays kind of dark to add in those middle tone values. Okay, the magic kind of happens after you use your eraser. Okay, then our last one. And we're going to use the scumbling technique. So I'm going to make a little sunspot. Okay, I'm going to start with my core shadow color, which is going to be my 6B, right? And that's my darkest value pencil. Okay, and it's gonna be this far right panel, and I'm gonna make my little C's to kind of fill in that panel there. Okay. On the front panel, okay, I'm gonna use a middle tone color. So that's gonna be my HB pencil again. And just add some scumble lines to the front. And then my last top panel, I could leave it blank because technically that's the highlight area, right? But to make it match with my other two panels, I'm just gonna take my lightest value, my 4H, and I'm lightly gonna add just some gentle scumbling marks right on the top. Just like so. Okay. So that's how we complete page 2. Please make sure all of your pencils make it back into your little baggie, and that goes to the right hand side of your desk.